Imagine waking up one morning and knowing, not fearing, not suspecting, but knowing with complete certainty that you are dead. Not dying, not dreaming, dead. Your heart is beating. You can feel it. But somehow, that doesn't matter because you are absolutely convinced that your heart stopped long ago, that your organs have rotted away inside you, that the body you're walking around in is nothing more than a decaying shell that hasn't realized it should stop moving yet. You try to tell people. They look at you with concern and say, "You're fine. You're standing right here." But their words mean nothing, because you know the truth. You are already dead. This is not a nightmare. This is not a metaphor. This is a real documented neurological condition called Cotard's delusion. And for the people who experience it, it is the most terrifying prison the human brain can build. Cotard's delusion, also called Cotard syndrome, or, in its most extreme form, le délire de négation, is a rare psychiatric and neurological condition in which a person holds the unshakable belief that they are dead, do not exist, or have lost their internal organs, blood, or soul. It was first formally described in 1880 by a French neurologist named Jules Cotard, who presented the case of a woman he called Mademoiselle X. She believed she had no brain, no nerves, no stomach, and no intestines. She believed she had no soul, and therefore could not die a natural death. She stopped eating entirely, because why would a dead person need food? She eventually died of starvation, utterly convinced to the end that she was already a corpse. Jules Cotard called the condition le délire de négation, the delusion of negation. The brain, for reasons science is still working to fully understand, begins systematically denying reality, not distorting it, not misinterpreting it, denying it at its most fundamental level. You are not alive, your body is not real, you do not exist. There have been enough documented cases over the past 140 years to give us a disturbing window into what this condition feels like from the inside. One patient, described in a 2013 case study, was a man in his 40s who suffered a severe depressive episode following a medication change. He became convinced that his brain had died. He could still think, still speak, still walk, but he interpreted all of that as irrelevant. The brain that was doing the thinking, he insisted, was dead. He asked to be taken to a mortuary because he said that was where he belonged. When researchers asked him how he could be talking if his brain was dead, he had no answer. He simply shrugged. The contradiction didn't register as a contradiction. That is one of the most chilling aspects of the condition. The brain becomes immune to its own logical inconsistencies. Another patient, a young woman, stopped bathing and eating, not out of neglect, but out of sincere belief that hygiene and nutrition were pointless for a corpse. She described smelling her own flesh, rotting, a hallucination so vivid and persistent that no amount of reassurance could touch it. Some patients go further. They report that they have no blood, that their heart stopped months ago, that they are hollow inside, literally empty, their organs dissolved, or never there to begin with. A few have described the feeling as a profound, total silence, where their sense of self used to be. Not sadness, not fear, just absence. That description, absence, might be the most accurate one. Cotard's delusion is not just a false belief. It is the disappearance of the feeling of being alive. Here is where the science gets genuinely fascinating and deeply unsettling. The human brain does something remarkable. It constantly generates what neuroscientists call a sense of presence, a background hum of selfhood. The quiet, persistent feeling that you are here, you are real, you are alive. Most of us never notice it because we've never not had it. It's like the noise of a refrigerator, you only notice it when it stops. In Cotard's delusion, that refrigerator goes silent. Brain imaging studies of Cotard's patients have revealed a striking pattern: drastically reduced metabolic activity across large portions of the brain, particularly in areas associated with emotional processing and self-awareness. In some scans, the level of neural activity resembles what you would expect to see in patients under general anesthesia. Effectively, parts of the brain are running at such low power that the system responsible for generating the feeling of being alive has partially shut down. But the thinking brain, the part that builds narratives and explanations, is still active. And when it notices that the feeling of aliveness is gone, it does what brains do. It constructs the most logical explanation it can find. The feeling of being alive is gone, therefore, I must be dead. It is the brain doing exactly what it's supposed to do, finding a narrative that fits the available evidence and arriving at the most horrifying conclusion imaginable. There is also a connection to a condition called depersonalization, a dissociative state where people feel detached from their own body, watching themselves from outside. Cotards may represent an extreme version of this process, where depersonalization goes so deep that the brain doesn't just feel distant from the self. It concludes the self no longer exists at all. Some researchers believe the key failure is in the amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center, and its connection to the regions responsible for facial recognition and self-recognition. When you look in a mirror and recognize yourself, there is normally an emotional resonance that accompanies that recognition, a feeling that says, "Yes, that's me." In Cotard's patients, that resonance appears to be absent. The brain recognizes the face but feels nothing, and from that numbness, the delusion grows. In the medical literature, one case stands apart from all the others. A man referred to only as Graham to protect his privacy developed Cotard's delusion following a suicide attempt. He had tried to electrocute himself in a bath. He survived, but something in his brain had changed. Graham became convinced that the attempt had actually succeeded, that he had died in that bathtub, and that everything happening afterward was some kind of extended afterlife experience or mistake. He stopped eating. He stopped caring for himself. He began spending his days in a cemetery because, as he explained to his doctors, it was the only place that felt appropriate for what he was. "Being dead," he said in later interviews, "was the most peaceful thing I ever felt. There was nothing to worry about anymore. Nothing could hurt me." When brain scans were eventually performed, the results were astonishing. Graham's brain showed metabolic activity so low that the neurologist conducting the scan compared it directly, in their published report, to the brain activity of someone under anesthesia or in a vegetative state. He was technically conscious and walking around, but his brain, in the deepest sense, had partially switched off. After years of treatment, a combination of medication and electroconvulsive therapy, Graham gradually recovered. The delusion lifted. He described the experience afterward as waking up as if everything before had been a fog he hadn't known he was inside. "I don't know how to explain it," he said. "I knew I was dead. And then one day I just wasn't anymore." Cotard's delusion is rare. Most people will never experience it, and most who do can be treated effectively with the right combination of medication, therapy, and in some cases electroconvulsive therapy. But its existence tells us something profound and slightly terrifying about the nature of consciousness itself. The feeling of being alive, the thing you've never once questioned, the background hum of selfhood that you've carried every second of your existence, is not a given. It is a construction, something your brain actively generates, moment to moment, using systems that can fail. You are alive right now because your brain is telling you that you are. That's not a metaphor, that's neuroscience. And somewhere out there, for a small number of people at any given moment, that signal has gone quiet. They are walking around in the world, thinking, speaking, breathing, and completely, sincerely convinced that none of it is real, that they are already gone. The horror of Cotard's delusion is not that it's mysterious, it's that the science explains it perfectly. And the explanation is somehow worse than the mystery. Jules Cotard, the man who first described this condition in 1880, died 11 years later. He never fully solved the mystery. He had uncovered the brain that erases itself from the inside. More than a century later, we understand it better. We can scan the brain, measure its activity, watch the lights go dim in real time. But understanding something and being able to fully protect against it are two different things. The brain is the most complex object in the known universe, and sometimes rarely, without warning, it turns against the very person it's supposed to sustain. Some fears don't make sense, and some fears make perfect sense. The fear of losing yourself, not to injury, not to illness, but to your own mind quietly deciding you no longer exist, that fear is wired into something very deep. Maybe that's why it's so hard to shake.